Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Monica Lee, Marketing Director for Viscosity North America, a full Oracle stack consulting firm with core expertise in Oracle database, including RAC, Apex, and zero downtime migrations, but more on that later. I'm just super glad to have you guys today. Today's presentation is co-hosted by Viscosity and the New York Oracle Users Group. The New York Oracle Users Group was founded in 1984 for the exchange of ideas, assistance, and support among users of Oracle software products like yourself. The organization consists solely of volunteer users, consultants, and vendors like us of Oracle-related products and services. So if you are interested, let me scroll up here so you can see. If you're interested in becoming a member, visit NYOUG.org. You can get more information here about individual, corporate, and educational and nonprofit memberships. They have different plans for everything there. You can also read a little more about them or follow them on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Now for today's presentation, feel free to submit questions to our presenters in the questions or chat prompt you should see in the lower right hand of the GoToWebinar panel. Today's presenters, Charles and Jason, will get to them if they have time, and if not, my awesome colleague Katie can probably help you get some answers afterwards as well. So Katie is going to tell you a little more about Viscosity, and then she's going to introduce you to today's speakers.
Thanks, Monica. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. As Monica mentioned, my name is Katie. I am an account manager here at Viscosity. And before I hand it over to Jason today, I just wanted to briefly introduce Viscosity and some of our areas of expertise. So our areas of expertise really fall under three pillars: data, apps, and infrastructure. A large bulk of our business is on the database side, including data integration, data warehousing, zero downtime migration to latest versions, including 19C. And overall, we help improve performance at the database level. In our applications practice, we do a lot of Apex development, EPM, ERP. We also develop custom apps. And in our infrastructure and hardware practice, we include Oracle's public cloud offering, bare metal engineered systems, and we were actually named Oracle's ODA Partner of the Year in 2019. So as you can see, we're very active and recognized within the Oracle community, especially on the infrastructure side, which is why we're so excited for the presentation today to talk about Oracle licensing. You can go ahead and click to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have a very close relationship with Oracle. The people that you see here on this slide represent some of Viscosity's leaders and our Oracle ACEs. These guys present at Open World and Oracle User Group conferences, both domestically and internationally. And we are eager to meet with individuals like you and help uncover how we can best support your team. So I wanted to include this slide to showcase some of the work that Viscosity has put into becoming trusted advisors who have written the books on Oracle's latest technologies and versions, anything from virtualization, pluggable databases to Oracle Exadata. If any of the books that you see on this slide interest you, or if you're interested in connecting with one of us one-on-one, please reach out to me and I'd be more than happy to share our resources with you and your team. Alrighty, so last slide before I introduce today's speakers. If you haven't already checked out our events page, please do so. We update this page monthly with our webinars, workshops, and other events that we have going on. And it's a really great resource, especially if you've been enjoying the workshops and webinars that we've been hosting. I will be sending out a copy of the slides and a recording of today's session to everyone in attendance later this afternoon. So be on the lookout from an email from me. And also, if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to email me directly. My email address is at the bottom of this slide. So let's go ahead and introduce today's speakers. Today we have our very own Jason Wipaki and Charles Kim. Jason is the Director of Sales and Oracle Technology at Viscosity, and he has worked in the Oracle licensing space since 2013. Charles, as many of you already know, is our founder and CEO of Viscosity, Oracle ACE Director, published author, and regular presenter at Open World and user group conferences across the globe. So these guys are both extremely dedicated to their work, and without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jason.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie, for the introduction. As Katie mentioned, my name is Jason Wipaki. I'm one of the directors at Viscosity North America, working alongside our CEO, Charles Kim, today. Prior to working at Viscosity, I actually spent a number of years at Oracle on the licensing team as a sales manager. So I know how Oracle thinks from the inside and the different ways you guys as hopefully owners of Oracle licensing can remain protected. I also know how difficult it can be to navigate the waters of Oracle licensing rules, all of the different changes, and that's exactly why we're putting on this free webinar today. So let's hop right into the goals of this session. I'm going to kick us off with some basic licensing terminology just to review and also explain some key concepts and Oracle timelines. Then I'm going to pass it off to the master himself, Mr. Charles Kim, Oracle ACE Director, who has pretty much seen every licensing use case out there. And he's going to be presenting on ways you can maximize the value of your software investment, also ease some of the concerns you may have that come from owning Oracle licenses and the support fees that come with it. And then we will touch on the process of consolidating processor licenses with engineered systems, the importance of CSI consolidation, virtualization, and most importantly, reviewing the best practices to avoid an audit, and also tips to save on the three most important things to a business: your time, money, and also resources. All right, so let's go through the initial life cycle of Oracle. In particular, 11.204 is no longer supported from an extended support perspective. Right now, the only option you have is to buy market-driven support. We have a few customers that have actually purchased market-driven support, and the prices do vary depending on your license footprint. But one of our customers is actually paying $100,000 this year, and they were already told that next year they're going to have to pay $200,000. So for most customers, this is too expensive. And we even have another one of our customers that tried to delay their upgrade by another year, and they said pretty much that they're going to buy market-driven support. But when Oracle came back with the pricing, they pretty much just said, we're going to put in the work and upgrade to 19C. So that's 11.204. 12.102, it did get a little bit of a boost in extended support. Now the end of extended support is July 31st of next year, 2022. And this is really important because if you're a ULA customer, an unlimited license agreement customer, which a lot of enterprise companies are, ULA customers get free extended support. Also, if you're an EBS customer, eBusiness Suite, you also get free extended support. So it's a really big deal for a lot of customers out there. And again, it's July of 2022, which means you'll get the mid-July PSU in 2022 as well. And so obviously, like, it's more lengthy of an upgrade process for than traditional customers. And so a lot of these EBS customers are timing for that upgrade right now. And we actually have a half a dozen EBS customers in our pipeline planning to make that upgrade to 19C later this year. All right, so let's talk about 18C. 18C is really 12.202. The premier support ended actually yesterday, June 8th of this year. And this means that the last available patch already passed. And this information is really important because a couple of things. If you happen to be a RAC customer on Standard Edition SE2 RAC, then SE2 RAC is not available on 19C, which means that 18C is the last release of SE2 RAC out there, which means that you either need to go to Enterprise Edition or convert your RAC to the cloud or to a RAC 1 node. The reason being is if you're one of those customers that needs to patch on a regular basis, the last available patch already passed, and now there are no more patches available for 18C. And you can't even buy extended support. And another thing, the reason why these release dates are really important to remember is because if you happen to be, for example, an ODA X4 customer, X4s on ODAs can't go to 19C. So the last release that they can upgrade to is 18C. So if you're an X4 customer, you're going to either need to buy a new EA, get off of that appliance, or just stick with the version you already have. And also an X5 customer cannot go to 21C. So there's all these different rules that you got to be aware of. And recently Oracle announced that 20C is dead, and not very many people know this yet. So let's quickly talk about the differences between perpetual and term licensing. So Perpetual is just your typical annual. You pay 22% each year in support. Term is if you're buying Oracle software, and you could buy it in terms. So Golden Gate is a great example of this. You know, a lot of customers will buy Golden Gate because they need it for an upgrade of a database, or they need it to migrate a database from on-premise to the cloud. They don't need it beyond the actual SSIs that are doing the migrations and upgrades. So they'll just buy a term license. And a term license can be, the minimum that we've seen is around 6 months. And when Oracle does this, they'll try, or when Oracle sees this, they'll try to extend you from 6 months to a year. And then the difference in cost won't be very much different between 6 months and a year. And those are the type of term licenses that we've seen. And it's much like the cloud. It's just subscription based. You pay forever, the same price over and over and over again. Name user plus licensing. Looks can be deceiving. A name user is more than just a user, but it also applies to, for example, registers or devices that are associated with the application. Whereas with a core-based license, it's purely dependent on the number of cores. So on the Intel chip or the AMD chip, it's the number of cores divided by 2, or 0.5 factoring is the number of licenses that you'll have to pay for core licensing. The core factoring table, which you can see at the bottom of this slide, this link, will show you how core factoring works for different chipsets. When I say chipsets, I'm talking about Spark or AIX powered chips. So depending on the chip that you have on that server will dictate the core factoring. But nowadays, 0.5 is typically the norm, so you can go in relatively safe with that assumption. All right, so now talking about different editions. Enterprise Edition is what most of you guys know. Standard Edition 2 is also there, and then you also have Standard Edition. But what Oracle did is when they started 12.1, they pretty much forced everybody to go to Standard Edition 2. And just by upgrading to that release, to be able to download and to implement that, you're going to basically be accepting the terms that you'll be running on Standard Edition 2. And Standard Edition was really intended to be starter edition for smaller environments like departmental applications, but we do have customers with very large database environments running on Standard Edition 2. So talking 25+ terabyte databases, we've seen that more than a few times. And we've also seen a lot of customers running mission critical applications on Standard Edition as well. The key thing about Standard Edition is that you're limited to 2 sockets, and each socket is 8 cores. And from an options perspective, Standard Edition does not have any options or packs. Also, things like RMAN can only have 1 thread on it, so you can't do parallel, or you lose, for example, bitmap indexes. It's very limited, but people are learning to work with it. We also have Personal and Express Edition, but you don't really see that very often. So let's talk about the Oracle sales mentality, and this is more my forte too. If you're running Enterprise Edition, most of the reps are going to assume that you're running diagnostic and tuning packs. If you're running eBusiness Suite, EBS, they assume that you're customized, and if you're customized, you're going to have to pay for the Oracle licenses on that server. If the numbers don't match up, or if at first glance you look suspect, there's a very good chance that you'll be flagged as an audit candidate. If you're running VMware, you could be a candidate for a license audit. If you've been in talks with Oracle account management or some of the sales reps on a big licensing deal and decide to back out, you could be in jeopardy for a license audit. So be aware of this when you're pursuing conversations with Oracle on big deals. That extra visibility, large deal values could put a target on your back. Starting with Oracle 11G, customers can disable diag and tuning packs to mitigate some risk. You can ask your DBAs to do custom database installations so that the options are not installed, but there's some extra legwork for them to be able to disable these features that they're not using. But it's very important that you do this so that later you don't get slapped with an audit or a bill. So this is Oracle's standard price list. I'm sure most of you guys have seen this. Notice one processor of Enterprise Edition is $47,500. And also at the bottom, you can see that the diagnostic and tuning pack is $12,500 for both of those packs. So $47,500 plus $7,500 for the diag pack plus $5,000 for the tuning pack equates to $60,000. So if you want to do upgrades and you want to be able to do AWR, creating profiles, creating baselines, then you're going to need that diag and tuning pack. Now, if we look at the name user cost, $950 for Enterprise Edition, and it's a minimum of 25 users per core. So you can see why NUPs is a lot cheaper than core-based. So a lot of customers end up going down that route. Look at Standard Edition 2. With Standard Edition 2, we have 17,500, and that's per socket. And even though it's charged as a processor license, it's on a per socket basis. And then you have, from a NUPs perspective, $350 per NUP. And then we also have Personal Edition. In more than a decade, we haven't seen a customer buy Personal Edition, but it is on a processor license basis, but it's not available. It's basically $460. Personal Edition would be as if you wanted to go license like a laptop and then do some demos. And then also we have Express Edition. Express Edition is completely free. Oracle recently enhanced Express Edition to 18C, but put all the bells and whistles in it. So now it's something that developers could potentially use, but nowadays, most of the lower environments will probably license a named user for their environment. So now developers may download it onto their laptop, play with it, and that's really what Express Edition is intended for. So we went over this example of one proc of EE plus diag and tuning pack is $60,000 per processor license. So if you add rack and partitioning, rack goes for $23,000 list price, and partitioning is $11,500, which bumps the price up to $94,500. And if you want to add active data guard on top of that, that's an additional $11,500, which will bring your total to $106,000 per processor license. And that's 2 cores, right? And then you have to pay 22% support, which is $23,320 annually in addition to that. Hardware support is 12%. And this is a very common setup for a lot of customers out there. Most customers need diagnostics and tuning. Most customers need rack, active data guard. And depending on the time of year, there's a very good likelihood that you'll be able to negotiate a 25 to 50% discount approved from Oracle off the list price. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it real quick off to Charles, and he's going to take us a little bit deeper.
All right, thanks, Jason. Thanks, everybody. I know that you guys are listening to a lot of these tidbits on pricing, but this current configuration that Jason showed is very typical for a lot of our enterprise customers. And in fact, from a rack perspective, it's rack and active data guard is very common. Let me switch my presentation to me and see. Right, cool. So you guys can see my screen. Jason touched up on this from a standard edition perspective to standard edition 2. As customers upgrade to 12.102, customers are going to be forced to accept the language for it from SE to SE2, and there's a big difference between the two from a number of cores per proc perspective. And so if you're on 11.204, you don't have the 2-socket limitation, nor do you have the number of threads limitation. But as you go to SE2, you're going to be bound to maximum 2 sockets and 8 threads per socket. So also, as Jason mentioned, as you go to standard edition, if you're on standard edition 2, it is not supported for rack on 19C. And so you have several options in this case. A lot of the customers are moving towards the standard edition high availability solution called SCHA, and it's available for Windows, Linux, and Solaris customers starting with 19.7. So basically, it's like rack 1 node, but for standard edition. The other option, and we're actually seeing this quite a bit because viscosity is also we're the professional services arm for Shareplex, and so we're actually seeing customers go with a multi-master database replication and trying to do the active data center configuration. So we've actually seen a few of these, believe it or not. And so you can do this with Shareplex, Golden Gate, Attunity, HVR. And obviously the last option is migrate and convert your standard edition license to enterprise edition. We don't see much of this, I think, in the past year, just seen a few of our customers do this. All right, so there's a lot of information on the screen and also on the screen, next slide as well. But if you look at the center circle, we have enterprise and standard edition. So basically you see the X's in the middle and you see the words never mix. And so on a server, you don't want to mix enterprise edition with standard edition 2 databases. Just doesn't make sense. You're paying double license. And likewise, don't mix processor licenses with named user licenses or NUPs. And from a licensing perspective, there's general things that you have to be considerate of. From a production perspective, these are full-term unlimited use. However, a lot of customers for non-production, they choose to either do NUPs or they do restricted licensing. For example, say that these amount of cores can only be used for development or non-production. And so obviously you don't want to mix those two kinds of licenses on a server. And if you're virtualized, and depending on your virtualization stance, and so we're going to tell you from a virtualization perspective what Oracle stance is, as well as what VMware stance is. And so, but in the Oracle stance, you don't want to be in the same virtualized cluster mixing production, full-term use with limited use on the same cluster as well. And so those are the kind of stuff that I need to think about. Jason mentioned the minimum NUPs for our standard edition customers, which is 10 NUPs. On the processor perspective, licensing is 25 NUPs per core licenses. And it gets to a point where if you have a lot of NUPs, it becomes more expensive to buy NUPs than to buy the processor Perpetual. And so that number is pretty high, but that's something to think about as well. All right, so production, key thing to note is that DataGuard perspective is considered to be production full-term licensing. And also you have the reporting license as well. In this example, there's a lot of misconceptions out there by people who think that if I have 24 cores licensed in production, that I must license 24 cores for DR. And there's another misconception out there where customers think if my primary is rack, that my DR has to be rack as well. It does not. So primary can be rack, DR can be non-rack. You can have a smaller number of cores for DR. And in fact, a lot of our customers use DR environment for dev as well to get the ROI in their licensing. And so also something to think about is that if you have options on your production primary database, your DR has to have the same options. Meaning if you have advanced compression, advanced security option for your primary database, you must also license those features on your DR side. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky, is that if I do those kinds of licensing, especially diagram tuning in my primary, in my production, do I have to license diagram tuning on my dev? And the reason why it gets tricky is if you're doing cloning. The minute you clone, and if you're telling Oracle that I don't need diagram tuning in my lower environment, you instantly violate it. And so as a process, if you are going to do that, you need to make sure that you turn off the features, just like what Jason showed you a few slides ago. There's an initialization parameter you can set to turn those features off. All right, so more things to talk about. From a cores perspective, we talk in 0.5 factoring, meaning 2 cores for Linux is equivalent to 1 licenses of Oracle. However, from a cloud perspective, Oracle does not treat all the cloud vendors the same. And so AWS, Google, Azure, Oracle does not honor hyper-threading. So ultimately, you'll end up doing a 1-for-1 from a licensing perspective. Another thing is also, not every core is a core licensing. So within the core processing license, we have the concept of full use, limited use, and even that goes into multiple categories. Whether it's limited use backup, limited use disaster recovery, limited use for non-production. If you are an ISV, a system integrator, or a VAR, and you produce your own software that you host to external customers, you're going to be into this prop hosting licensing as well. And so if you're an ISV, you may want to reach out to us for more insight, as we can help you with that as well. From a support perspective, Jason mentioned that you do pay 22% annually. And from a licensing perspective, you can buy term and you pay that same amount over and over again, or you buy perpetual. Where term is very common is, and we see it all the time with Golden Gate licenses. So customers buy Golden Gate in terms of 6-month term or even a 12-month term to do near zero downtime upgrades and migrations. And so that's very common that we see all the time. All right, so this is another example of showing you the core factor, but more so is that, as you can see, you will see if you click on this core factor table that from a Spark perspective and from AIX perspective, that the core factoring is a little different. And so the older models of Spark even have 0.75 for core factoring. Okay, and so if you take $47,500 on a 2-socket box with 24 cores each, and this is strictly from a enterprise edition licensing perspective, to the 0.5 factoring, you're at $1.14 million. Okay, so we have a blog here that we have for the top 10 reasons why you should be leveraging diagnostic and tuning pack. And so we actually had a couple of customers who, for the longest time, did not purchase a diag and tuning pack, and they were actually an EBS customer, and right now they're going through a journey to go to 19C, and they decided to purchase a diag and tuning pack for performance reasons. And the key thing is that from an AWR perspective, as baselines and SQL profiles and tuning, it's really hard to do without the diag and tuning pack. It makes it much easier. The idea of being able to take a plan that deviated and forcing it down and making sure it accepts it after the upgrade, those are huge for from a risk perspective for a lot of customers. All right, so let's talk about engineered systems. So as customers go to Exadata, and there's basically, from an engineering system perspective, of Oracle Database Appliance and Exadata, you have the ZFS and ZDLRA, but I'm talking about from a consolidating databases too. So in this case, as you go to Exadata, and it's very common that as you go to Exadata, you're going to be reducing the number of cores that you need for the compute nodes. So if you take a typical quarter rack, you have 2 compute nodes and 3 storage cells. The storage cells itself also do work, and so most likely you will not need the amount of cores that you have on the compute nodes. Also, with the enhanced engineering that Oracle has for hybrid column compression, storage indexes, the ability to offload the queries to storage cells, and now the Exadata has come with persistent memory and an enormous amount of NVMe storage. The performance you're going to get on the Exadata is going to be far superior than you're going to be on the commodity built hardware. And so, so you'll be able to do a lot more on the Exadata with fewer licenses. Okay, so From a licensing perspective, what is the minimum number of licenses that you need on the ODAs versus the Exadatas? And there are different rules. And so on the ODAs, you can literally license one core license, which is 2 cores. On the Exadatas, however, you have a minimum for the Exadatas. And so on the 8th rack, it's 8 cores per compute node. And on the quarter rack, it's minimum 14 cores. On the older models, X2 to X5, 40% of the cores must be enabled from a licensing perspective. Now, KVM is a big part of Exadata, and starting this year, KVM is a big part of the ODAs as well. And so with KVMs, you can have a much more flexible licensing model for ODAs as well as x86. Oracle announced at Open World in 2019 that if you're running Oracle Linux, keyword is Oracle Linux, you can leverage KVM for hard partitioning. Okay, so KVM and the ODAs is relatively new. On the Exadata, it came out last year or the year before that. But on the ODAs, it's came out relatively new, and so they have some restrictions. Like as of now, at least, we expect these things to be lifted at the end of the year. So it must be 19C databases that run on ODAs, and only 1 database per KVM as of now. But you do have the flexibility from a licensing perspective. All right, so again, ODAs have a much easier licensing model than the Exadatas, because we can literally do 1 core licensing, 1 proc licensing at a time on the ODAs. On the HAs, however, they do have the requirement that both sides of the compute nodes have to be licensed the same. On the Exadatas, we don't have that kind of rules, okay? And then also from a ODA perspective, as the KVM infrastructure matures by the end of this year, you're gonna see the ODA X8-2 start being marketed more from a virtualization platform, because we're gonna have a high availability 2-node rack, 2-node cluster being able to do virtualization. And so it's going to change customer perception and about the appliance. Okay, so ODAs are notoriously popular for capacity on demand for licensing, and while you stay physical, you just pay for what you need and you don't have to virtualize. And so it's a very accepted practice for a lot of customers, because with a single patch bundle, it updates your database, your operating system, firmware, hypervisor, and the clusterware as well. And so it has been a popular choice for a lot of customers. All right, so let's talk about hardware upgrades. And so a lot of customers, as they go from 11.204 or 12.102 to 19C, they're going on new hardware, because you're looking at, 7-8-year-old technology if you've been on that platform and never have upgraded the hardware. And so also CPUs are significantly faster now, and they're a lot more energy efficient. And we just went through an upgrade for a huge customer, and we run a 5-node rack cluster. Actually, they were on a 6-node rack cluster, and we went from 11.2 to 19C. And on the target side, we significantly reduced their core count by 33%, and also reduced the number of nodes from 6 to 5. And so we went from 2 sockets with 6 cores to 2 sockets with 4 cores, and even reduced the number of rack node from 6 to 5, and we're still able to outperform and upgrade to 19C than previously before. So, upgrading a hardware is the easiest way to get the bigger bang for the buck. And so you're talking about hardware costs is tens of thousands of dollars. Software costs, especially Oracle, is millions of dollars for the software stack. Okay, and so also as you do your software upgrade, hardware upgrade, max out and leverage the memory. Hardware is significantly cheaper. Oracle databases are proven to run better with more memory. You can pin objects and packages to the shared pool. You can pin tables and indexes to the buffer pool. We can leverage, if you're on Oracle Linux, the DB flash cache, meaning I can segment part of the NVMe or SSD and extend my SGA. And now also, if you're an Enterprise Edition customer, you can leverage the database and memory base level for free, meaning that each rack node or each instance can actually allocate 16 gigabytes for in-memory. And this is then they got backported to 19.8 release update. Again, actually, did I go backwards? Yeah, I went backwards, sorry, I went forward, And so let's talk briefly about consolidating CSIs. A lot of customers, especially if you have a big Oracle footprint, or if you bought Oracle, piecemealed every year, buying more options, additional cores, you're gonna get your payments are gonna be spread out throughout the year. So some of our customers who are really savvy only buy in May, for example, for this reason. And consolidating CSI for them is huge because they can just renew one big payment. And then also from a support perspective, having a single CSI, you can see all your issues in a single environment. Now, the negative aspect of consolidating CSI is that if you want to drop the number of cores, or if you want to drop certain components within your CSI, you have to cancel your entire CSI. Because what happens is that if you tell Oracle support that you want to go, reduce your core count or change your contract, they will refactor your license cost. And somehow some magic happens and you still end up paying the same level of support without the options. So again, if you're looking at consolidating CSIs, definitely call us for help. We can help you with certain conditions, such as, for example, if you have subdivisions or sub-entities, we can help you transfer some of that stuff and even remove some of the licensing as well. So give us a call. We've helped a lot of customers do this. KVM, I mentioned before, Oracle announced that they will honor hard partitioning. And in March, they extended this to ODAs. Exadatas have had this last year. And so now, again, I will provide you a URL for the document for you to look at as well. And there are some technical things you have to do from a KVM perspective. And so you must use the Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager utility, and you must use the OVM VM control, as well as set CPU pinning. And so this is what a lot of people don't understand about KVM and OVM, is that when the term hard partitioning means that you lose one of the biggest features of virtualization. If that node dies, your VM dies with that physical node. If that Linux gets corrupt, you're on the base OS, your VM dies with that server, and then you must restore and bring it up on another server. Things, HA equivalent to vMotion, you lose those capabilities once you hard partition. So the term hard partitioning means that 4 cores allocated for this VM, I'm going to actually say core number 1, core number 3, core number 6, core number 9. Those 4 cores are going to be dedicated to run this VM. And so if I lose that socket, and my VM is on a single socket, I lose that VM, and they got to go and bring it up on another server or do a restore. All right. We're going to talk about OEM a little bit. OEM is free to use. OEM is the #1 platform that we tell all of our customers that you probably benefit from putting this on VMware, because you get all the VMware values, HA, vMotion, DRS, whatever you need. But however, because you don't pay for VMware, you don't pay for OEM, you pay for the targets that it manages. And so the targets are licensed, but OEM, OMS, or the OEM metadata repository is not licensed. Okay, and you can also have multiple OEM management servers. A lot of our customers have 2 or 3 OMSs, but only on one OEM repository. Now, we are seeing some customers wanting HA for OEM, and so they want to do rack on the back end. We have customers doing rack on the back end with an ODA as well as Exadata. Well, guess what? Now you're at the point, now you got the license. Also, if you add tables to your OEM repository, that database has to be licensed. Now, if you're going to put an RMAN repository to your OEM, you don't have the license because RMAN itself, the repository is not licensed either. Okay, and obviously, if you're going to use OEM, you're going to be doing a lot of tuning. As you do a lot of tuning, you need less CPUs, and of course, you'll be able to you'll be able to get by with a lot less CPU footprint. The same rule still applies, the 80-20 rule, meaning that the 80% of the performance is application code, and 20% is still going to be your infrastructure. And so no matter how much hardware you throw at it, there's some code. Even if you throw Exadata, we've seen Exadata customers, literally die without going through a tuning exercise. And so 80%, the 80-20 still applies, even on today's timeline, as well as Exadatas and other really super powerful machines. All right, so how do we save licensing for your dev and QA? Definitely take advantage of the restricted use licensing. Make sure that you know that you can tell your partner or to Oracle, I want my dev and QA to be for development use only. And so at the same time, once you go this route though, however, you have to make sure that you actually maintain that route. And if you're, if you have a big footprint of licensing, meaning that you have multiple companies and within subsidiaries, you're going to distribute prod licenses and dev QA licenses, it's going to be more of a management you have to deal with as well. And also at the same time, DataGuard is also considered to be production. So make sure that when you're licensing your prod that you, especially with options, that you license dev at the same time, DR at the same time. We recently ran into a customer who had a VMware cluster in production, and they were doing DataGuard to another VMware cluster in their DR side. And in that same cluster, they had Enterprise Edition licenses, SE2 licenses, as well as development licenses. That's where it gets really, really tricky from a licensing perspective. So be careful as you, especially in a virtualized infrastructure. All right. Now, do I have to license my primary database server as same as my DR? And the answer is yes. Now, can I license 16 cores in primary and license only 4 cores in DR? The answer is yes. If I'm running a rack database on my primary, do I need to run rack for DR? You do not. And so we even have customers, literally, I kid you not, have 20-something cores in the primary and only have 2 cores, of licensing for the DR. And so from a DataGuard perspective, we tell our customers that you only need enough cores for the DataGuard instance to keep up. And so, but also if you're running DataGuard across a wide area network, you're going to be bound by that network. You can't push archive logs fast enough for you to go and have and demand all those CPU cores. And so from a DataGuard perspective, and you can even make it non-rack, but you have to be cognitive of your RPO and RTO. And if you need to switch over and be at full capacity, you may have to just run it with rack. But however, if your RPO and RTO is 24 hours, I mean, sure, you can literally go and, within 24 hours, convert non-rack to rack and even add nodes within 24 hours if you have everything automated. So think about that kind of stuff. Lastly, do I need to license Oracle if I'm keeping my database, and the keyword is database, in sync with tools like rsync or even with storage replication? So the general rule is that you, the customer, own the database. However, the binaries itself, the Oracle software, is owned by Oracle until you purchase it. And so if you're replicating Oracle binaries, then you are going to have to license DR. But if you're just replicating your database itself, then you don't have to pay for that aspect of it. So again, if you want to limit your licensing because you do have a big SLA with your customer and a huge RPO and RTO perspective, at that point you can go and say, you know what, I'm going to go through and do a full install and patch, and then and then I can bring my database up for DR. Right, so let's talk about cloud. And why are we having this cloud conversation? It's because everyone's going cloud. And so it's especially in the midst of our COVID pandemic, we're seeing more and more customers go cloud. In fact, all small workloads are moving to the cloud. What we're seeing a lot is every data warehouse right now is going to cloud. And reporting databases are going to the cloud, backups are going to the cloud, and just basically DR is going to the cloud. But data warehouses are definitely going to the cloud. And even though we are seeing some go to autonomous, we're seeing more and more customers go to Snowflake as their data warehouse. So as you deal with your migrations to the cloud, think about short-term needs for dev and test, and think about from a reducing your footprint by leveraging PaaS solutions or bringing your own license. And so what used to matter for most people was a 3 to 4 year total cost of ownership. And with the, in the midst of COVID, customers are just trying to survive. And so they're just concerned more in terms of what's my cost going to be for the next year. And so focus on, the business value versus a long-term IT operations cost, right? And so I wanted to bring this to you, to your attention. And so if you're doing BYOL, with keyword is database cloud service, not infrastructure as a service, but PaaS that Oracle offers. You get data masking, diagnostic and tuning pack, real application testing, and TDE for free if you're doing BYOL to Oracle Cloud. And also remember, all data traffic in OCI is encrypted. And however, like I said, it does not apply to IaaS, only for PaaS. And from this configuration perspective, right now, these are the limits of number of cores and memory that you have. Notice that it's 24 cores and 320 gigs is the maximum configuration for DBCS, which is still pretty hefty from a cores and memory perspective. All right, so Jason mentioned Euless, and when does it make sense? And so Euless customers can deploy unlimited licenses, but you pay the fixed price up front. You agree upon a true-up period, and it's typically 3 to 4 years, and it's based on some forecasted number that you work with Oracle. And when you do true-up, this is where some creativity can save you a lot of money. And so again, if you're thinking about Euless, we've helped a lot of our customers negotiate Euless with Oracle, and now what we're starting to do is we're actually just starting to just flat out sell Euless to our customers now. All right. And so again, as you are going to the cloud, protect your investment by doing BYOL. And as I showed you before, if you're doing DBCS, you get all those options for free. And it's mainly is that the TDE. Every customer, as they go to cloud, they're going to want to make sure that everything's encrypted. Okay, and so what separates Oracle from any other cloud is that their database cloud service infrastructure is included. So what does that mean? That means that even though it's a PaaS offering, you get access to root. And so in Oracle Cloud, you get access to the OPC account, and from the OPC account, you can do sudo and log in as root. You can add more storage to your PaaS as well. And so there's a lot of flexibility built in. Okay. So obviously you can also run Oracle on Google, AWS, and Azure. The fundamental thing is that Oracle RAC is not supported in any of the cloud except for theirs. And even in Oracle Cloud, it's only supported from a database cloud service perspective and autonomous and on exited cloud service. And so those are the things you got to think about. And as you go to other clouds, just take into consideration that hyperthreading is not honored. from a licensing perspective. Okay, which means that 2 vCPU is equal to 1 processor license if hyperthreading is enabled. Okay, so the key thing to know here is that you should always license Oracle based on workload. Okay, so this is what I mean when I say threads, right? So here we have 8 cores, but you have 16 logical processors, or equivalent to 16 threads or 16 vCPUs, but it's only 8 cores. And so in this configuration, if it was on-premise, you would be licensed for 4 cores. If this was cloud, you would license this for 8 cores. All right, so let's talk about audits. So Oracle is a equal opportunity auditor. They don't differentiate from auditing OVM customers versus auditing VMware customers, believe it or not. And so even with OVM, you must license every node of the OVM cluster. So from an LMS perspective, they don't discriminate between OVM and VMware. And I know that VMware gets a lot of the bad heat, but Oracle treats them the same. Also, from an audit perspective, LMS also audits ODA customers as well as exited customers. It's the you see a lot more publicity on the VMware footprint. Okay, so now you as a customer, you have a choice. You could take the VMware stance or take the Oracle stance. And what I mean by that is that most of the VMware folks will not argue about, do I need to license every core on that server? Now, most of the VMware guys will also argue that I do not need to license every core of the cluster. And recently, Oracle has taken some stances in terms of, if you're gonna do VMware, Oracle on VMware, you must isolate compute, isolate network, isolate storage, meaning that I must have a dedicated storage just for this VMware cluster. I must have dedicated network hardware just for this cluster. And so, and they do the exact same thing with OVM customers too, by the way. And so, except with OVM, you can do hard partitioning, but if you're not doing hard partitioning, meaning the key thing with hard partitioning is that you lose certain functionality. And so, yes, Oracle does not play fair with other vendors. That's a very true statement. And so, again, if you're in that position where you're starting to get the letters from Oracle, call us before you go really deep with Oracle LMS. In fact, call us when you first get the letter. We do soft audits for a lot of our customers. The smaller customers, we do it as a sometimes we do as a free service, especially if they're an existing customer. But we have our own audit scripts that we run. And in fact, we recommend to Oracle customers run our scripts versus running Oracle scripts. If we can help you be the agent in between you and Oracle. All right, so we don't just stop at the database. We can help you with the middleware, EBS, JDE, and PeopleSoft licensing. We're actually doing some of the JDE to EBS migration for a customer in Florida, and we can help you with that as well. And so we can help you negotiate your EULA, especially when you're truing up. And the key thing to remember for you guys is that we want to be your unbiased, third-party trusted partner. All right, so I intentionally went really quick at the end to field some questions. Let's see if we have any questions here. Okay, let me see, how can I make this bigger? Yeah, both EBS and non-EBS databases. Do we need to get extended support? The extended support is only offered to EBS, and if you're on 12.102, obviously if you're EBS 11.04, you're out of support already too. And so if you're on 12.102, you're gonna have support until July of next year. But from a purchasing extended support for non-EBS, that's gonna be quite a change for you as well. So the typical rule is this, is that you get premier support for 5 years once Oracle releases a software. And so, and then after that, year 1 of extended support, you pay an extra 10% on that contract. Year 2 and 3, you pay an extra 20% on that contract. So if you are paying, let's say you're an enterprise company, let's say your annual support cost is $1 million. Well, extended support's now going to cost you $1.1 million for the first year. And extended support will cost you $1.2 million the second year and third year. Okay. Right. Another question: does a 22% annual support fee apply to discounted price or list price? That 22% applies to discounted price. And so I know that all of our examples showed list price. We just wanted to show you what that looks like. You know, the amount of discount that you get with Oracle, whether you bought it directly from the Oracle sales team or you bought it through a partner like us, the price is governed by how much you buy. And so as you buy more Oracle software, we can go and ask for deeper discounts. And so we've seen, you know, customers get hardly any discounts for when they try to buy, you know, one socket of one license of standard edition, or you know, just one core of enterprise edition. And so it really depends on how much you buy, the level of discount you get. But the 22% is based on the discounted price. Right, for EE, you specified 11,500 for partitioning. Okay, so advanced compression. Okay, so Jason had that up earlier, but let me pull it up. I have it too.
It's 11.5, Charles.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that same pricing is here as well. Let me see. Yep, and so 11.5. So as you can see, a lot of their components are 11.5. All right, so let's see another question here. Yeah, there's a log miner is a big one. And same with streams, is that with 19C, customers are being asked to go to Golden Gate. But again, like the Golden Gate pricing is the highest of all. And then SurePlex is cheaper than Golden Gate. And again, it's the amount of cheapness and how much more cheaper it is depends on how much you buy, again, with them as well. Where the services are for SurePlex, but the thing is that from a SurePlex perspective, it's significantly reduced number of man hours to implement SurePlex to do a zero downtime migration upgrade, or to rip and replace streams as well as logminer. And so it's ease of use. And so how often do you see customer or on dice.com where there's a listing for SurePlex? You see a lot of them for Golden Gate. We just don't see it from a SurePlex perspective. Yes, this recording will be available, and please reach out to Katie and or Jason for the recording. And so we're right at top of the hour. Thank you everybody for attending, and we look forward to talking with you more in the future.
Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you so much, Jason, for your expertise today. We really appreciate your time. And again, like he said, look for an email from Katie. She will get you the information. Thank you so much, New York Oracle User Group, for all of our, gosh, it's been a year's worth of partnerships with webinars. So we really appreciate that. And I do hope you guys go and check out NYOUG.org and see what they've got coming up. So with that, have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.